So pull out those Chromebooks. I have been grading your Fin essays. I'm starting at the bottom and moving up so that we get, I don't know, I always take so long for those people at the end of the alphabet. So if you're in the lower end of the alphabet, it's going back up. Sit down, get your connection back. Quiet. Okay, get onto your Canvas. So have Fin essay? Yeah, you can for like credit. You go, oh, you're charging it, but can you still get on it if it's plugged in?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you can just sit on that stool if you want to.
Maggie, what did you do?
See, Maggie came locked in the campus. Okay, I want to tell you about how the grades are working for Hudson. They work the same for those essays. They're going to work the same way as they did for your rhetorical analysis essays about Frederick Douglass. But just as a little reminder, if you get a 4.5 or 6 on your essay, that is full points. That's 50 out of 50. If you get a 3.5 to 4, that's 45 out of 50. That is an A minus. If you get, or maybe it's a, yeah, A minus. If you get a 2.5 to 3, it's 40 out of 50. That translates as a B minus on Skyward. And then if you get 1.5 to 2, that's 35 out of 50. And usually if you're below that, it means it wasn't really finished, or it was just sort of like, I don't understand what you just turned in. So it's kind of like in that range. That's how those scores work. Okay, any questions about that? All right, cool. Then if you didn't turn in that essay, it's worth 50 points. It's worth a big part of your Q3 grade. So make sure you get that in as soon as you can. Yeah, and you can do rewrites on them. Yep. Okay. We're going to do word of the day a little bit differently today. So click on the assignment on Canvas called Wealth Distribution Research.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Soviets. That's what I spent.
All right, and there is a Google Doc in that assignment that you can click on. Is anyone not able to find it at this point?
It's still loading.
It's still trying to get logged in. Okay, let me explain. So there's 4 words, 4 phrases listed there that you can use to conduct some research. I want you, as best as our internet can handle, and I know there's tons of blocked sites and so on our internet, but as best as you can do, you're going to do some research on your own about those 4 terms. So you're going to Google it, you're going to find sources that you trust, you're going to sort of surf around until you find something that you like. And I want you to find 3 different articles that have something to do with any of those terms. Like if you want to find 3 articles all about income inequality, you could, but you're just going to find 3 articles about some of those terms. You're going to kind of summarize them or put some relevant details, and then you're going to say what you're thinking and how it's summarized, how it's kind of like jiving with you. You don't have time to read all 3 of these articles very carefully. You're kind of doing a little speed research session here where you're just trying to like engage with as much information as you can in the next 20 minutes. So this is an assignment you're doing on your own for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to have you talk with each other about the sources that you found. So any questions about this? All right, great. If you have any questions, you let me know. But it should be quiet in here while you work on it. Shh. So I'm going to have you discuss this for a couple minutes after seeing sort of like that version of wealth. The place where I stopped it is right when they're about to lose a whole lot of that. But I want you to talk with each other for, let's just say 3 minutes in your normal little groups and talk about whether or not you think that this is a representation of the American dream or if it is not a representation. Okay, discuss for a minute. Okay, let's discuss this together. Okay, so what do you, right, my eyes. What do you guys think? Is this a good example of the American dream? Yeah, JJ.
I think in the guy's perspective, yeah, because he's not like, he earned his money, he did what he needed to do to get all of it, and he's not like blowing his money, he's actively spending it on things that he wants.
Okay,
It may not be a good use, but
so what would be the difference between blowing the money and spending it on what you want?
like he actually handles the finances, cares what he spends it on, like.
So more like conscious spending.
Yes, and
Okay.
the wife is literally just like, oh, he gives me money so I can spend it on whatever I want, whenever I want. For my kids, we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
You know, that's there's two opposite people where it's like, I have all this money, I'm gonna spend it. I get all this money, so I'm just going to blow it.
Okay, so it seems like the connection between the like being in the labor force working and spending the money makes spending the money a little bit more okay versus if you're just handed the money and spending it willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Emily?
I feel like it doesn't represent because we're all in a way on a search for happiness. And the only way we can find happiness is through financial freedom and financial security. But they're obviously not happy and they're constantly trying to please their appetite for happiness with the bigger and the better and things that aren't gonna actually.
So they're kind of like presenting themselves as happy. What makes you feel like they're unhappy?
They're constantly trying for more.
So it's like the dissatisfaction.
Right.
Okay, so one thing that we kind of talk about with the American dream is if it is about getting a richer, better, fuller life, those ERs on the end of those words, it's not about getting a rich, best, or full life. And so maybe possibly it's like this constant striving for more is producing
Well,
unhappiness.
and it's how you think of it. What's a richer life? Is it more money or is it, having more traditions with your family that bring you
Yeah.
happiness, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so maybe we feel like they're looking for it in the wrong spaces too. Like when she's like, when I visit my children, these are the stairs I'll use. That is still in my eyes, but I'm gonna use it in a second, so I'm gonna turn it off. Yeah, so it's like, oh, I'll visit my kids, sometimes up these stairs, and you're saying like we get this evidence that they're placing value in the wrong things. Okay, JJ, yeah,
I think the American dream is success more than money.
okay,
So people come here to like get a job, start a new life. So that's just being rich. That fiction is just being rich.
Yeah.
I feel like the American dream is just if you can make money, support a family, and have success and be happy with that success, then you're okay.
So do you feel like there's a point where the American dream then has been fulfilled? Like you've got a sort of like middle class life, you're able to like do the things that you want, you can go on vacation once a year or something, and then anything past that is not representative of the American dream?
Well, past that, it really depends on like what, I feel like it's what they do with the money.
Okay.
If they are past that point, it's how they spend it,
It's-
or what they spend it on.
And okay, so it's like more about like the excess of things.
Yeah,
Okay.
like how they were saying where they just blow the money and it's not actually happy, they want more, instead of people being a millionaire and like, we'll go on vacation times a year, we can be happy with our family still and not be these rich losers.
Okay, so then it seems like, yeah, what you started with that was like, it's not necessarily connected to money solely. It's connected to some kind of like satisfaction with the money you have.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Sophie.
Represented because it like American dream is like stability and success, but they are like so like their family is dysfunctional. Like you can tell when the maid is more of a mom than she is, and she married up for money, married down for a young wife. And it's
Yeah,
just,
right.
like, not, and he like did illegal things, and so I feel
Okay.
like it's not stable or like safe.
Yeah, okay, so we're concerned with the legality. We're concerned with the lack of connections that we see.
And I would judge it also, like, you can be that rich but still have the American dream, but the things they spend it on are not like that, like don't make sense.
Okay, you're just like, why do you need this? Why did you need your dog stuff?
Yeah.
Why did you need a 90,000 square foot house?
90%.
It's bigger than his classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, did they say what the square footage was of the bedroom, of the closet?
Maybe that's
So did they lose the house?
Okay, so they
Yeah.
don't,
How does this end?
they don't, but they wanted to. They want to sell it really badly, but no one can buy it in the market that they are in, like obviously. And so they're actually finishing the house this year, they say. Yeah, so this was filmed in 2007. The movie came out 2012. Well, they had their old house. I mean, they had that house that they like were showing. They just didn't finish the new house. Yeah.
How much is it worth?
I don't know.
You don't need
I
a
don't
bowling
know.
alley, you don't need a
Can I look it
bowling
up on Zillow?
Sure. I don't know if it'll be on there, but Dylan?
I think it definitely started out as like a good representation of the American dream. So he's like this guy who like built up this like empire, this franchise, right? He like started on just like his orange field, and then it's just like turned into such a like having Miss America parties in your house and like marrying some girl who's like half your age.
Mhm.
Like I think it definitely started out as like a good representation, but then just like all sense of like I guess normalcy just like went out the window.
Okay. So is normalcy a part of our version of the American dream? So far, we've got happiness, success, stability, legal, and normal. Do we agree with that? That normalcy should be a part of the American dream?
Well, normal is different to every single person.
Uh-huh.
So like if you are an immigrant, you have no money, it's normal to have no money. And when you get to America and you build that money, you're like, I'm rich.
Yeah.
Someone that's super rich that now works a cubicle job and he's like, I'm not rich anymore. This sucks. But my parents are still rich, so I can still ask for money from them.
Right. Okay, good. Yeah. So what I think is so interesting about that last scene is when he's at this Miss America party, he is surrounded by people and everyone seems to be, I wouldn't say necessarily like comfortable, I'm not inside their head there, but everyone doesn't seem to be shocked at that party. There is kind of a sense of normalcy among this particular brand of rich people, so there's like these different versions of normal. Okay, you guys said he might be a good example of living the American dream, but what about Jackie? Didn't Jackie work hard and achieve what she wanted? And what, I mean, really, because I think, yeah, Xavier.
I think at first you were trying to she said that you went to like the Rochester
Yeah.
and you could get like an engineer idea.
Right. Yeah. So she went to school. She became a software developer at IBM, right? A software engineer. She decided she didn't like it. And so she went for what her individual version of happiness is, right? And it's not like catching a rich husband is easy work. I don't know if you guys have done pageants, but like I've heard from people who do pageants that it's like quite difficult to do and takes a lot of like primping and prepping and weight loss. And you saw plastic surgery, right? And all of that so that she can catch this rich husband. Does that not qualify for work in the same way building his empire qualifies as work? Yeah.
It's 100 million.
It's worth 100 million? I kind of thought it would be more. Yeah. That's weird. Maybe it's
because the market.
Yeah,
is really-
it is Orlando. Who wants to buy in Orlando? Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that like
It was like whether or not she's living her own version of that American dream. Okay. Yeah.
First, I think that she may have worked hard in her like earlier in her life when she was doing all that, but she worked hard for that money that she has.
Okay. Okay.
Also, I looked it up and it says it's 295 million. You're gonna ask why.
Oh, okay. So she found a different one. She
Oh,
said
I don't know
300
which one.
million about.
But yeah.
Who knows though? I don't know.
I
No
don't
one's gonna buy it. So it's like it's all just sort of imaginary. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Emily.
I feel like it may have been hard to, prep and do all of these in order to get into this position, but I also don't really classify that as work.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody can do it. You know what I mean? Anybody can change the stance that way. And so compared to his working with the life.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe his work required some sort of creativity or innovation, and her work is a little bit more like boring and predictable and sort of not unique. And so we're gonna value that one less. Yeah.
Like if she made her own money like that, doing like pageants and stuff, or working on what she did before, I think it would still show for something. But because she isn't earning the money that she's spending,
Yeah. I mean, she stays in a relationship with this guy that seems very unpleasant to me, really unattractive, right? Like she is doing like labor to be in this relationship with this guy. Yeah, Kaylee.
I feel like, I feel like we're pretty perfect with people that can do, but I think that the amount of work, like, I think the amount of work doesn't have to be the same for everyone to achieve it. Like, I know everyone is saying empire, but just because like my own grandparents didn't go their own empire, doesn't mean they didn't achieve their American dream. Because like my opinion is I think they did achieve their American dream. They didn't go to the empire,
Right.
and maybe they didn't really hard. I think they worked hard, but it's difficult for everyone, and we shouldn't judge someone and maybe just based on how much work they did in comparison.
Yeah, and especially when we're thinking about how the American dream could be individualized, like my American dream or my like dream for my life is probably looks a lot different than somebody else's. Like I don't want a pool, I don't want a big house. In fact, I would love to just like live in an RV and not have to work, maybe that could be my American dream. Is this something that's supported by that idea of the American dream, or is the American dream really do require like your participation in a certain kind of capitalism and a certain way that you're earning enough, and certain value for certain kinds of work too. Like do we value the work that the entrepreneur does more than the gas station attendant, Yeah.
I agree with Kaylee. I think
Guys.
a lot of the American dream is hard because people have unequal opportunities. And especially in life like that sense that two people could work the exact same, but because that guy had access to land and like money to start building that enterprise, then he could make a lot more than someone else who was working for the same thing, but they're started their own job and was like doing something different.
Yeah.
He's gonna earn a lot more.
Yeah. And so if we only base the American dream on money, then it'd be really hard to say that we even have an American dream when everyone ends up with such different results, Yeah, JJ.
It's also
Guys.
like what she said. So he had the land, someone that was born on a farm that doesn't get anything, they just have to go off to another city to do. They can't, it's so much harder to just have land and then put money into it and build something than to have to be able to get the money to get that land, support yourself with the land, pay for something on that, while
Yeah.
supporting yourself with that job, then building everything.
Right, and he's also the perfect age for that particular venture because of small business loans or business loans that were sort of available to that age of person, you know, I'm talking about boomers here, that have access to those kind of opportunities, whereas other generations might not have that same kind of access. Other generations might have had to go to war or whatnot, right? So there's all these different sort of circumstances that decide how much you're going to end up with in the end. So do we want to say that that means that there is no American dream? I don't think so. Yeah, Keegan.
The American dream is like based on success and money and stuff, you know, but I think it's based on happiness and how happy and how well you've achieved the goals that you've set for yourself.
Mhm.
Because like everyone gets paid differently, like women and men's wage, that's
Mhm.
different. And so like you can't really achieve the same American dream even if you're doing the same amount of work, you know? And then and they were obviously not happy, so they obviously don't have the American.
Okay, yeah, good. So it's like if we think of the American dream as not so attached to money, we could still think about how even if groups of people are earning, and I'm not fully committed to this idea, but even if people are earning different salaries, you know, like teachers make a certain amount, doctors make a certain amount, even if they're earning these different salaries, the American dream, at least according to that definition I put up on Zoom class, it's like it should still be available for everyone to feel happier and a more fulfilled life, regardless of that particular quality. Right now, obviously there has to be some sort of like stability there. You guys talked about stability, but maybe when it gets to be excess, we don't like to think about it as the American dream anymore, because it feels, doesn't it feel tacky to us? Watching their, like the way they spend their wealth, it's tacky. We're like, oh gosh, like you are not a good representation of what we want people to see when they think of Americans. Maybe I'm wrong, but you know, he's sitting on a literal throne. The art that they have is terrible. They've stuffed their dog, you know, it's like, it's not stuff that we see as being like, and I'm gonna keep saying these words, like classy, right? And I think part of this that's so interesting is he is what's called new money. Have you guys heard that term before? New money versus old money?
Yeah.
David Siegel really does come from a lower middle class background, well, middle class background. His father owned grocery stores. He really did get this opportunity, just, you know, got a loan, built up this empire, became who he was. But he didn't start out with that kind of wealth. Same with Jackie, she doesn't start out with a lot of wealth, right? And so they've built their way up and they've earned all of this money, and this is how they've decided they like to spend it. Like they maybe like the throne, they maybe like, you know, having the biggest house in America or whatever. But as we watch it, we think it's gross and we think it's like, why do you want to live that life? It seems like gauche, what's the word? Gaudy, ostentatious, show-offy. Whereas somebody else might buy, like instead of paying to stuff your dog, you buy a Picasso, an original Picasso, and it's millions and millions of dollars, and it hangs on a wall, you know, and it's lit up really nice, and there's like understated furniture in the room, and none of us would say, oh, he shouldn't have spent, well, maybe we would, I maybe would, but we won't say, oh, he shouldn't have spent money on that Picasso. We think, now there's a classy rich person, right? So maybe part of the way that we're seeing wealth is based on what we identify as being like worthwhile objects to spend your money on too. Yeah.
I think that, you know, because like even though they're like all rich and stuff, they're still like others stuff up in business. Like she like just feel that
Uh-huh.
like just that they don't love themselves. Surviving is
Yeah.
they're not really
Well, it's fascinating that phrase you said, know yourself, because a lot of your guys's paragraphs, the ones who turned it in, your paragraphs about what role education plays in the American dream mentioned getting a job. It was like, well, you go to school to get a job, right? But if we're thinking about it more in terms of fulfillment, maybe part of the education aspect of the American dream is learning about yourself, learning about the world, learning about your connections to the world, and being able to sort of like decide what makes you happy then. Decide what kind of stability you want, you know? Okay, so that last question I ended with, this idea of new money and old money, that has a lot to do with Gatsby. Gatsby is written in, I think we're just gonna get into it rather than a little presentation. Gatsby's written in 1925. This is like at the height of the period we call the Roaring 20s. This is when people are doing really well in terms of them. People are doing really well financially, especially if you live in the cities, and more people are moving to the cities, and you're getting more and more intermingling in the cities. So that means intermingling of classes and intermingling of races and genders. In a city, in an urban environment, that happens a lot more than in a rural environment. So you have like a lot of social change at the same time, where women are behaving different than women have ever behaved before. You have this like kind of type of girl called the flapper girl. And not everybody was a flapper girl. I think sometimes we think like every woman in the 20s was this kind of person. It's almost like being like, you know, being like a, what groups do you have now? Hipster, Visco girl? Being a Visco girl now, is that even a thing anymore? That was a thing last year, but I don't know. But like being a part of a little social group, that was the flappers. It wasn't every woman, but they were influential enough that people were starting to like notice them and starting to kind of use their styles for inspiration. So these women, they cut their hair short, they smoked cigarettes in public, they drank and danced, and they'd wear kind of like slinky dresses. Also, the style for women changed, as it tends to do. 10 years earlier, it was all about curves, and then once the 20s came along, it was all about being like very boyish in the way that you look too. So it became like kind of an androgynous style. So there's all this kind of like mixing going on in the cities. People are going to speakeasies because alcohol is illegal at the time. So they're, you know, have the secret code to get into the back room of the saloon where they can drink hard liquor. And at these parties, there'd be men and women intermingling in ways that were like way freer than before. But you also have races intermingling and jazz becoming like a very big popular style of music. So you have Black people and white people and men and women all hanging out in these clubs. So that's part of why they call it the Roaring 20s. Everyone is just having like a very good time. Not everybody, but that's kind of like the stereotype of it. But in this kind of reckless way, maybe in a way that reminds us of this movie, where it's like, I've got all of this excess energy, excess relationships, excess money, and I'm going to like spend it in whatever ways I think are going to make me happy in this moment. This book predates the Great Depression, which happens in 1929, that the stock market falls. And you can kind of see though, like what is leading up to that Great Depression, what is leading up to like people spending and people behaving in this way. So I think we should just start reading it. So take out your books if you can put it away. And open to the first page.
First page, is that a candle or a flame?
It's the Scribner logo.
Oh, I thought it was like something
The book is dedicated once again to Zelda, that is Fitzgerald's wife. There's been some controversy recently that people think that Fitzgerald basically stole the idea from this book or from Zelda. I'm not sure. I'm not totally sure. But.
Is he dead?
Yes, he died really young. Fitzgerald This was his third book. His first book was a smashing success. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, this new young writer is going to be amazing. His second book, people were kind of disappointed. By the time Great Gatsby came out, they were like, we were wrong about him. It's not that great. Writers loved the book, like Ernest Hemingway or Gertrude Stein. They all read this and they were like, this is going to be this is the next great American novel. But people didn't really buy it. And it went under the radar until World War II. It's thin and it was cheap to buy the rights. So they published tons of these in little pamphlets and sent them overseas to soldiers. Soldiers came back from the war loving this book. And so it grew in popularity, and that's when it started to be like re-examined. But by that time, Fitzgerald had died. He died at 42. I think technically it was a stroke, but I mean, it was basically alcoholism. He died of being an alcoholic. Yeah. This Side of Paradise. Side of Paradise. Yeah, it's a book about a student at Yale. I like this a lot better. But
I like this
it's good.
movie.
It is with DiCaprio.
Oh yeah, he's so hot.
Okay, so we're gonna start here. It's told. JD, do you have your book?
I had it at home. I have a book. that I
Oh.
Get with you.
Just look over Dallin's shoulder. Okay, so it starts, this book is told in the first person from a man named Nick Carraway's point of view. So he says, in my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person. And so it came about that in college, I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, at least in the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. Okay, the book is not always this sort of like highfalutin. This is Nick, when Nick gets into this like little philosophical state of mind, sometimes he goes down these tracks and we need to figure out what he's trying to say here. Most of the book is really plot driven, but let's figure out what Nick's saying about himself. So he says at the beginning that his dad told him not to criticize people because they haven't had advantages that he's had. But then in this next paragraph, what does he say about all these other people? This paragraph where he says, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments. And yeah, Kaylee. Yeah, he says they're boring. He says when they tell him things, they're basically being plagiaristic, meaning I've heard it before. They're just copying other people's thoughts. And instead of listening to them, he thinks they're weird, all these people who tell him things. Instead of listening, he pretends to be asleep sometimes. I love that. Like people are trying to tell him things and he just is, dropping up so that they won't tell him this stuff. So he says, I reserve all judgments. But then he proceeds immediately in that first paragraph to talk about how he has judgments of all these people who talk to him. They're boring. I don't like listening to them, etc. They're wild, etc. And then at the very end, he says, I forget that as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. So what does he believe about himself? He's born well off, and this makes him more decent. Like, he's like, I shouldn't judge people because I know I've had advantages. He judges people anyway. And then he says, I am more decent than other people because I've had these kind of advantages. And he recognizes that that's snobby of him, but he doesn't seem to be able to stop because he still judges all these people. Okay, let's keep going. And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. So he's like, he's basically saying like, yes, how you grew up, you know, what your environment is like does determine how you behave, but at a certain point that shouldn't matter anymore. I should be able to judge you. It says, when I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of the creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. So something crazy happened to Nick. He was back east. He's come back west now, and he's thinking about these things that happened. And he's like, I don't want to talk to anyone again. I don't want to hear about their hopes and dreams. I don't want to hear about their secrets, because whatever happened to me back there was enough to sort of shut down that interest for me. But when he talks about Gatsby, he talks about him in these very flattering terms. He says, this line, if personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, that line could probably sum up, you'll see when we're done reading, could probably sum up the entire book. What does it mean for personality to be a series of unbroken gestures? What's a gesture? How do you describe it? It's like gesturing. Yeah, it's something outward. If you have a gesture of kindness, it's like, oh, I'll do something kind to sort of show that I am a kind person. You can have a gesture of all sorts of things, but it's always on the outside. Yeah.
I think he's saying that like their personality, like not really who they are to their
Yes. Yes, and so if Gatsby is this unbroken series of gestures, it's like there's something very superficial about him that might not be the real him, and yet Nick calls that gorgeous. He says Gatsby's gorgeous. So keep reading. You're going to read chapter 1 for next time. So it's like 20 pages, very short. But there's also a response on Canvas. It's a 1-paragraph response. The way you get full credit for that is by showing me that you actually read the book. So you're including enough detail that I can tell that you did the reading.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So you checked out